Okay, so there are a couple changes that I want to make to this painting so that you guys can watch the video and then we can move on to working on some detail. I'm going to switch this over to my USB, which I don't have on yet, so you'll get this screen here. Okay, let me switch this video on. All right, and you know you have the focus. Oops. Make sure this thing is focused because darn it, I think last time it wasn't focused, or one of the times before. You guys have to tell me in the future when it's not focused. Okay, I'm gonna adjust this so that we have the whole painting on here. And whoops. Okay. There. Not an exact science here. Adjusting this with my tripod. Try to get it there. Okay. And that looks like it's in focus. I think, yeah. All right. Whoops, crap. Okay. Well, that didn't work out. Like this. Ah, the imperfections of Zoom. Okay. This thing doesn't focus very well in its wide view mode. Okay. It's important that we see the whole piece, but are as close as possible to have it zoomed in as far as possible. Because we're going to be looking at composition. Let me get my light working. So there's two things that I want to work on today. One of them, the first one is the dark light contrast here on the jug, which before I darkened this area back here, I had pulled my value punches all over this piece, which is my habit. It's not always a good habit, but generally what I work with. So now that I've darkened this background color, this shadow area is too light. Even though it's a white jug, I need to see this value here in the shadow area joining, grouping with the background values. It doesn't have to be as dark as them, but it has to group visually with them in terms of the value pattern or the notan. Okay. So I'm going to mix a color. Oh, I need to get some paper towels. Everybody hold on, I'm going to get some paper towels and try not to wreck my setup here. Okay. Have paper towels now. All right, so it's tight space in here. Double check. Okay, good. So, ooh. All right, I'm going to move the light. Good thing I checked. Good thing I checked the visual. I'm going to move this light back so that it's not visible. There, let's see if that improves matters. That's better. Okay, good. You guys don't need that light in there. It's just going to screw up the light sensor and the exposure. Okay. So, got my paper towels, got my medium. You guys can hear all the sound effects. Maybe next time I make sure that I'm all set up before I turn on the recording. So keep in mind that what you're seeing, because I'm looking back at my computer, my laptop, you're seeing darker values than I'm seeing. It's just a matter of maybe it's the camera interpretation and the difference in lighting between the camera and my eyes, what I see versus what the camera sees, and it interprets and then it sends through the wires. So there is a difference. It's the imperfection of zoom. All right, so I'm not actually, when I look at the jug and I look at my setup, I'm not that far off in what I need here. Maybe what I need is to lighten this also, lighten it and bring it up in value. But I do need to darken this a little bit so that we have a value grouping with the background. Right, I'm grabbing a hog bristle brush because what I'm doing is a pretty rough adjustment where I'm having to cover ground, so to speak, and I want to do it quickly. So just to remind myself, I'm grabbing some white. You have a tiny bit of white there, but I'm going to make that bigger indication of white there. So that is my whitest white. So that reminds me that of how dark this is, and that I can make some adjustments upward, and I can also make some adjustments in now I'm forgetting the word, in intensity. I can make some adjustments in intensity too to this color, and that will make a difference. In fact, I'm going to start here. I'm going to start with this color and adjusting the intensity of this color upward, because I had mixed some blue into this color. You can kind of see, or I can at least see, the blue and the green and yellow in here. And so if I make a color that is closer to this color here, this sort of putty peach color, then that is going to increase our illusion that we have light hitting the pot and that this is going to look darker. So I'm going to start there. And I'm using some white with some cadmium red, and that's a little too pink, so I'm going to add some cadmium orange. Let's see, and I'm not mixing anything else into this, so let's see what this looks like. You can actually see on the brush a little bit. It's probably too cold. So we need more cadmium orange. This is probably too much cadmium orange, but let's just go ahead and put this up here. Too much cadmium orange. So adding more white. And putting out a little bit more cadmium red so that I can make a mixture of those two things. I don't want it to be too pure. And I could add a little bit of, a tiny bit of ultramarine blue, so that it's not so pure looking. Added even a little bit more ultramarine blue just so that I have something that's not so pure. So once I put a color down, then I have to make adjustments when I add to it, because I'm adding to this color. So if I want to change that color, I have to account for there already being paint down. So there's a pattern on this pot, as you know, and I'm really not going to deal with that right now. I just really want to deal with these values. So you can see by adjusting the color on the light part, I'm increasing the illusion that light is hitting. And then there's a cast shadow here. Light is hitting down here too. You know, the light shifts around because I have to reset up this setup every time, and so there are changes, and I just have to kind of go with the flow. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, I want to create the illusion of the cylinder of this jug, and so I want to push this edge back. So I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue to my mix, or a part of my mix, a section of my mixture here. And I'm going to put it here. It's pretty subtle. I'm adding a little bit more, so maybe it won't be as subtle, but there. So now I have, I don't know if you can see it, if the camera's picking this up. I have a little bit more of a cool here, and I have warmer here. And then there are various reflections here on the handle. Let's see. I want to push that back just a little bit more, and so I'm adding a little more ultramarine blue and a tiny bit of burnt umber, if I could get some here on off my. So, and one thing I want is to soften this edge. I don't want that edge to look like a hard edge, because if it does, it's going to bring that edge toward me visually. And I want that edge to go back. So then I can adjust my line, because my line has moved here. I just have a little bit of solvent on this brush, and I'm moving this line back. And I can also keep that line soft with this brush. Okay. So there's a subtle feeling of the cylinder aspect of this pot. And now I want to make, and by doing this, I've made this look darker, this side. And so now it's starting to group more with the dark background. And of course I would come in here and I lighten where all the light is hitting up here. But I am going to do some darkening over here now. I'm looking at the reflection of this magenta onto the pot. I'm going to extend that up. I'm going to push this edge back here, like I did this one. And I want to soften the transition into the shadow, because the transition is pretty soft, although it's muddled a bit by the relief that's on the pot. So, but it's a soft transition into that shadow because it turns very slowly. So I'm going to start with my light mixture from over here, and I'm going to, and I can use, whoops, here. I can use my finger because I already have dried paint down. So I have a couple choices here in terms of blending. Right now I'm using a thin coat of paint into the dried paint. That's one way of doing it here. The other option is to mix the color that's in between. And you can also use a combination of both of these techniques. You know, you can mix a color that's between, and then you can kind of blend it. So I'm using a little bit of transparency here and letting the background color show through as I brush this over and make a thin layer. Now I'm going to darken this side a little bit as it is bending back toward this shadow, because I feel as though it pops forward visually to me. So I'm always thinking about, I'm observing, but I'm also always thinking about ways to reinforce the three-dimensional illusion. So I'm going to mix a little bit of cadmium red with some burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Whoops, too much ultramarine blue there. To make it dark, basically a dark purple, but it's sort of a muddy purple because of the burnt umber. So, and I'm going to darken this edge as it goes back. So I want to reinforce that, this curve, and the fact that this goes back and out of sight, basically. So even though I can see this distinction here, the edge of the pot, I want to. So I'm using this transparently. I've got a little bit of medium in there, and I'm making the edge of this pot less distinct. And I want to do something similar here. To push that back. And then I'm also seeing now, there's all kinds of detail here where the handle of the pot is a little bit more blue. So I'm using this transparently, and I'm going over my dried paint. To create more of a three-dimensional feeling. And I can come up here and neutralize this blue that I have in here a little bit. And in doing all of this, I'm darkening the shadow side as well, just in the process. There, you can see that I've darkened it compared to up here. So that's the first thing that I want to do. So, and I've chosen, because of my background in glazing, I've chosen to use a transparent glaze and darken this and soften this edge, right? But you can actually mix up a color here if you want to. That was actually my initial plan, and then I defaulted to my glazing background. So the other thing that I want to do, aside from adjusting these values, is I want to address a compositional issue that's come up that I observed. As you recall, we talked about Sully's piece when we were looking at cluster, and we talked about the background horizon line behind the cup that was in the foreground of her painting. And we have a similar situation here. We have the apple, and then we have this background line here above the apple. And remember, with Sully's painting, we talked about how it will reinforce the three-dimensionality that we're trying to create. We'll reinforce that illusion if we put the horizon line behind the apple here. But there's a reason I don't really want to do that, because if I do that, if I bring the horizon line down here, I have a smaller amount of foreground here compared to a larger amount of background. And what I would rather do is not drop it. I'd rather keep this. I like this relationship better than I would like this relationship, that smaller relationship. So I'm going to do, I'm going to play around with the colors right here and see if I can push back this edge, this line, and make it less obtrusive so that we don't notice it being back here. Now I've got a couple things going in my favor here, as opposed to Sully's painting. I think Sully's painting had an orange foreground and a relatively light background. So there was a big shift in not only in intensity, from the orange to the background, but also in value, there was a big shift, and there was a hard line. So if you squint at this background colors, you'll see that the values, while they are two different hues, the values are not that far apart. And that makes it easier for me to disguise this. Also, I have a soft line back here. I haven't really turned this into any kind of realistic fold in the drape. And so that helps me too, having a soft line back here. But even if you're painting a photorealistic painting, you can disguise these kinds of things without the viewer necessarily being onto it. And so I'm going to mix up, I'll probably glaze here. Again, I'll glaze some of this blue over this red to make it less apparent that there is a change. The other advantage is that the blue is a cool color and it recedes, and the red is warmer and it comes forward. So if I make it cooler, by making it a violet, it will recede more. And the idea is to do it just enough to make the viewer not pay attention to this, but for the viewer to still think that this line continues. So it's a bit of a balance. I'm going to see how it works, basically, because my other option is to, I have a couple other options. One is to lower this horizon line. The other is to raise the apple, which I don't really want to do because the apple would be up here. And that seems odd to me. It would be behind the jug or next to the jug. And I kind of want it in front of the jug. And so, I don't want to do either of those two things compositionally. So I'm going to see if I can kind of make a trick, do a trick here, a visual painter trick. So, and by doing this, I'm introducing you guys to the idea that these tricks exist. There are things that we can do to move the viewer's eye, to deflect from something that we don't want them to pay attention to. All right, so I have a violet mixed up. Let's see what happens if I... So I'm using this a little bit transparently. There's a little bit of blue here in this. I'm going to neutralize this because this is a pretty neutral blue and this is a pretty neutral red comparatively. And I've got a little bit too much intensity going on here. So I'm going to neutralize it with some burnt umber so that it's not so intense of a purple levitating here. So, and I can pull this out here, right? So it makes it less apparent to the viewer that there is this line. So we're playing a little game, a little sleight of hand. And the other thing that is that would help this illusion is when I put details into the apple. So when I come in to make the apple look more realistic, I put this hard shadow underneath. I pull out this edge of the top of the apple so that it comes forward. That adds to the viewer not looking at this because this will recede even more. So that's my current sleight of hand. I can even pull some of this violet over here to make this less apparent. I can do whatever I want here, right? So I'm making this be less of a line too, there. And so I haven't quite solved my problem yet, but I'm on the road. So that's our lesson for today. And hopefully on Monday, we will start to tackle some of the aspects of this apple in making it look more realistic, which, you know, it might be a little tedious because it takes a certain amount of pickiness to make something look realistic and photoreal, but we'll have a run at it. Whoops, bumped my camera again. There we go. All right, so I'll see you guys on Monday, and I'll send you an email, and we'll probably post this to my husband's Dropbox account, and you can go get it there. All right, let's see. Is there anything else I need to do here?